Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Scotty, and I'm joined by my good friend currently calculating the shock absorption potential of a large pile of napkins. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going this week, Matt?
You would have died, Scott. You would have died.
Okay, Matt, it's a fantasy story. Remember, there's a dragon.
Would have at least shattered his bones.
This week on the show, we continue our coverage of Stephen King's The Eyes of the Dragon. This time, we're covering chapters 102 to 142, aka the end of the book. We're doing it this week, Matt. We're going to finish it.
Yeah, and a very satisfying ending it was.
It was. I am curious, just at the top here, you know, we kind of touched last week how we felt like there was a lot to do, or at least I felt like I questioned you if there was a lot to do in these final 40 or so chapters. Did you feel like the ending was rushed, or did you feel like it was paced well?
I did not particularly feel that it was rushed because there were really only a few things that I felt like we needed to see happen. And those involved something of a redemption for Thomas, something of a redemption for Dennis, and then Peter being free, and confronting Flag, and like that was like all that had to happen, you know. So yeah, like sure. There's a bunch of different twists and turns in terms of how that happened, and I building up to it, I was like, how are we going to play this out, you know? But no, I didn't feel like it was rushed. Personally.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, we will talk all about the ending of this book as we get to it. And of course, we will be back next week to do our full entire book discussion of The Eyes of the Dragon. So we're going to keep our large book-wide thematic discussions for next week. But I'm looking forward to wrapping this book up with you.
Sounds good.
So let's do it. Let's get into it. We begin with chapter 102, and our final section of this book begins with Dennis frantically digging through the snow, looking for Peter's response message that he dropped from the top of the tower in that locket. I really love, Matt, how King emphasizes just how close Dennis was to never finding the locket, that like if his knee had just been, you know, a quarter of an inch to the left or the right, he would have pushed the locket down and deeper into the snow and would have never found it. And then who knows what would have changed from there. King does this a lot, I think, especially in this book, like emphasizing just how unlikely and random the events of the story actually are. Unlikely and random, but true, of course, because that's the way the story is told. And it's just really interesting to me that how he points this stuff out over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, ever since Insomnia, I've been noticing this thread of his obsession with randomness more and more. I was actually re-listening to Drawing of the Three this last week, and really jumped out to me that Jack Mort is obviously an agent of the random. Like he thinks specifically about like the joy of, you know, throwing a brick out into, you know, the darkness and it will have all these this ripple of knock-on effects out into the world. And it was like, wow, this is like exactly the same language and concepts that were used in that book. So yeah, it's the mix of purposefulness and randomness, I think, is also present here in this book.
Yeah, I think he really enjoys kind of poking at and prodding at the incredible cause and effect chains that just life creates. You know, it's in a story, you can kind of build that chain yourself. In life, you just have to look back on it and see how it all laid out. But I think he's inherently fascinated with that idea.
Yeah.
I also like their little detail here that the thing that calms Dennis down in this moment and allows him to actually start searching again instead of like frantically just digging around the snow is the voice of his daddy, which is also a very Dark Tower thing, that your father's voice comes to you and is this calming presence.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I like this part here, Matt. His eyes returned again and again to the "I love you, my good Dennis" written in the King's own blood. He had not needed to add that for the message to make sense, and yet he had. Peter, I would die 1,000 deaths for you, Dennis thought. And this is where I ask you the question, Matt. Is that a good thing?
I found myself wondering several times while reading this week's reading, and I guess maybe even the previous weeks, like, is Dennis being a bit too hard on himself? Which is funny because, yet again, I'm going to mention that, like, I was rough on him, but I was joking. Whereas like he has like totally internalized this burden of being like the one responsible for everything that happened to him. And spoiler, he ends the book like being like, now I'm going to basically exile myself and chase Flag forever. I mean, probably something horrible happens to Dennis, if we're being honest, in the far future.
Yeah, I mean, I love how we kind of talked about Dennis's reverse Shawshank as his moment of redemption. We're like, okay, you've climbed through the shit pipe. You've done it, Dennis. You're good now. Congratulations. But Dennis is like, nah, that was step 1 of 12.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And I mean, it got me thinking, we had this big conversation about duty last week, and we have a whole discussion question of it and got a bunch of very interesting answers from our listeners. But this makes me wonder, like, this is one of those things where you're like, is this kind of duty, is it good? Like, because like the thing about Peter is he's never actually done anything for Dennis, like specifically, like he was a good master to this young boy, but like he hasn't he's not like been like a king that has like provided for the general welfare of his people, like there's no reason here Dennis should be willing to die 1,000 deaths for Peter beyond, Peter's status as king and also the sense of duty he has to him as both a person and a king. And it's like, this is one of those things where you're like, oh, this is how that whole concept is manipulated into getting people to throw their lives away. Oh gosh.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure if King is doing that on purpose, but it's definitely something that's jumping out to me with this character where I'm just like, Dennis, you should have just stayed with Peter and been his leal servant.
Yeah.
It is funny to me that the one time that Peter ever yelled at him was to bring him a napkin, and the book ends with him bringing him a shitload of napkins.
Yeah. There's so many fun jokes with the napkins. Like, of course, I think it's Sasha that says like, I doubt the fate of the kingdom will ever rest on whether or not you have a napkin, but if it does, it's always good to be prepared. And of course, it quite literally does, like 100 times over.
That's funny. I never noticed. I mean, I didn't notice that stuff the first time through, but that's great.
So we cut from Dennis back over to Ben, Naomi, and Frisky continuing their search and following up on Dennis. And there's this one, I wanted to point this out really quickly because they're talking about a measurement of distance that is called a coner. I think Naomi makes some crack about how she could go on 100 coner from the place where Ben dropped dead. And it's like, what the fuck is that? Right? Like it's really interesting because this is a book that is ostensibly supposed to take place in Midworld. We know what the Midworld measurement of distance is already. It's wheels, but here we have another term, another nebulous distance term.
It's an EverQuest pet name, Scott.
God, that's a deep pull that maybe 3 people listening got.
And those 3 people are gonna be
they're
really
gonna
pleased.
love it. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, I guess I figured that it was a different Midworld unit that he hadn't, like, maybe he hadn't nailed down exactly what units he was going to be using, because this book was written after. I looked this up and now I've forgotten it because my memory is horrible. But it was written after Drawing of the Three. Was it written after? The one after Drawing of the Three.
Jesus, Matt, The Wastelands?
Was it written after The Wastelands or before The Wastelands?
It was written before The Wastelands.
Because maybe like I don't think Roland used the term wheels more than a tiny bit in the first 2 books, if at all.
And just so we're clear, this was written before the Drawing of the Three as well.
Oh, okay. Then
Drawing of the Three came out in 1987. This came out in 1984.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because Drawing of the Three references this.
Yes,
so,
correct.
So yeah, I mean, he probably just hadn't quite nailed down his units of measure.
Yeah, I mean that's the dualistic reason, but I was just like, it's really interesting that like this is another unit. Like this is why it's kind of, and until the very end of this episode where you happen to be reading the Drawing of the Three at the same time and spoiled my whole Matt, we've actually heard about Dennis and Thomas before thing that I was going to lay on you at the very end of this episode, that you just happened to be listening to the book that has it in there. We like where Delane takes place in the space and the time of Midworld was left pretty nebulous.
Right. Because honestly, this could have happened 1,000 years ago, and Dennis and Thomas could be chasing Flag through thinnies and in and out of dimensions. We don't know, So.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, I have no reason to believe that in particular, but it could be true.
Yeah. I think realistically this is supposed to take place,
contemporaneously
before the fall of Gilead, but within the same lifetime of Roland before he lived for hundreds of years.
Yeah, probably so. Wouldn't be surprised. Before we move on, I just want to return briefly to the idea of napkins, because I just realized, like, there's another famous story where, like, the idea is that, okay, well, what is a napkin? A napkin is like basically a small towel, right?
Uh-huh.
And the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy mythos is all about, like, the towel. The towel is the most useful thing you could possibly have. You always got to know where your towel is, because in an emergency, right? Peter knows where his towel is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay. I mean, it's really fitting, because the napkin is this thing that we're told specifically that no one else in the kingdom sees any value in, that, like, none of the royalty of the kingdom sees any value in having a napkin. Only Peter does. And I think it stands as a thing that makes Peter unique amongst the monarchs and makes you hopeful for his ability to be a good king, because he understands the value in a thing that no one else could.
Yeah, I like that.
So Ben and Naomi at this point start flirting with each other as they basically run a marathon. And this is just proving your prediction from last week correct, which we do indeed find out by the end of the book that the two get married. So nice work on that one, Matt.
It was not hard.
I also will say, we said this at the beginning, and I didn't say it when the Naomi character was introduced, but King's daughter's name is Naomi.
Okay.
So this is, this book was dedicated to her, and this is definitely the insert character for her.
That's very cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. All right. At one point, I swear to God, Matt, I thought poor Frisky was about to jump into the castle moat and die here, and I had just, like, forgotten or wiped my memory clean about the poor dog dying, because King does this over and over again. But fortunately, Frisky is a good girl and can swim, so that's very good. Eventually, they find the path that Dennis took into the castle through the shithole, and they follow him. They follow him in.
Yeah. So, one thing, which obviously this isn't unique to Stephen King, but I think this is just a secret of really good writing, is taking very seriously all the minor physical implications of a challenging situation, because that's really fun to read about. And what I'm specifically referring to how much time we spend on, like, the danger and tension of, they're really cold, they're creeping up on the edge of this icy water, they have to take this leap of faith across the water into this, this jagged hole. It's a very sort of practical, down to earth situation, honestly. But it just, by really digging into the details of it, I think that just makes it really fun and riveting.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think, from an analysis perspective, like, I didn't pull a lot of this particular part of the book because there wasn't much to say about it. But I think it's good that you at least mentioned that, because we do take a long time with their journey through the snow, their journey to the moat, their journey to figure out what's happening, their ability to even be able to get through the standpipe. And it is a large part of what the climax of this book is about, them getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a large part of a lot of books, and it's like you said, it's hard to analyze beyond just pointing out that it is indeed, the fun is in the sort of very tactile, practical problem solving. This happens a lot in the book that we're reading for the Doof Book Club right now, actually, where there's the book Piranesi. There's lots of pages of basically characters, like, methodically solving practical physical problems, and when you say it out loud like that, it kind of sounds boring, but it's like crack. If the writer is talented, at least. Yeah,
if you write it well, it is so riveting to watch characters just, like, methodically go through this kind of problem solving thing. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
it's great. Yeah, it's great in Piranesi, which everyone should read and come to our book club next Friday. And it's also good here. You're right.
And it's a short read. So
yeah, it's only 250 pages, which is like a Stephen King short story.
Yeah, and the audiobook is done by Chiwetel Ejiofor. Is that it?
Ejiofor is, I think, how you pronounce it.
Ejiofor. Yeah, and it's delightful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so they meet up with Dennis after a little bit of a fake out here, where Dennis sees two floating eyes and assumes they belong to flags, but they're just good frisky dog eyes, so they meet up, and this reunion is filled with an exchange of stories. They don't call it a palaver, but come on, Matt, it's a palaver.
Yeah,
I love the text here though, because it's like the way King writes this is like, they exchange stories, many of which you've heard, and the ones of which you haven't, I can tell you quickly enough. Like, I love the little narrator interjections there.
Yeah, I love that too. It's pretty much throughout the book evenly, but I guess out of all the Stephen King books we've read, this is the one where it's the most direct. I am the narrator. I am telling you this story.
Yeah.
The way the book ends is particularly, like, yeah, and that's the end of that type of like narrator ending.
Yeah, for sure. I do love this really interesting exchange they have about the fact that they once again encountered no guards in the castle on the way up to the napkin room. And Naomi says here, guards of the watch, she said, drunk, and not drunk out on a picket along the northern borders of some pissy little barony no one ever heard of. Drunk in the castle, right in the castle. And this is great because I think this is another instance of like the general collapse of the kingdom actually benefiting our hero's ability to like put things right. Like, would they have been able to sneak into the castle successfully of like a fully functioning kingdom of Delane?
I would say no. I mean, yet again, this is evil destroys itself. In fact, I think there are several moments in this chapter where the heroes actually benefit from the incompetence that Flag has cultivated here.
Oh yeah. There's going to be a lot of that here at the end of the book for sure, because I think King that is essentially what King is doing with the Flag character again, for sure. So the three decide what they must do next, and then King does it again, Matt. We have this line here where I think this is Ben talking, and he says, "We sleep, get our strength back, and tonight before midnight, Ben spoke briefly. Naomi grinned. Dennis's eyes grew bright with excitement. Yes, Dennis said, by the gods, you're a genius, Ben." So what is being hidden here, Matt, is the plan to pile up the napkins under the needle, the window, basically the thing that ends up saving Peter's life. And in this case, I think King's decision to hide this plan makes sense. He wants us to, feel a moment of shock and anxiety when Peter's rope snaps and he begins falling, only to land comfortably and shockingly on a pile of napkins. I get it. Uh-huh. But, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here for the 7,000th time, I can't help but find this just a bit clunky, the way it's handled here.
This is one instance where if they had, okay, so normally I would just be like, yeah, I don't like it. And it's not that I love it this time. It's that the alternative is like, it's very hard to proceed from this point, keeping this information from you. And if King just shows you, yeah, they're going to bring the napkins, then he's almost obligated as a storyteller to have that not work. So an example would be, I thought that earlier in the story, he was hinting at the idea that there would be this big snowstorm and then the snowdrifts would pile up underneath the window. And that would be the thing that saved him. Because there's, if you think about it, there's actually a few hints here and there that point in that direction. And I was like, I got it. He's going to, and then the text specifically says it was snowing super hard, but actually the snowdrifts piled up on like every other wall except the needle because of the way the wind was blowing. And I was like, oh shit, what are they going to do? And, so I get, I think maybe it is a bit clunky. This is one situation where I'm not exactly sure what the remedy would have been, because you know what I'm saying? If he just told us here, then that would really take the surprise out of the moment.
And I think I thought about this a lot. I don't think hiding the whole thing with the napkins from the reader is the part of it I don't like. I think it's the very specific and direct characters talking to each other then for some inexplicable reason, the text just stops before the character finishes his plan, merely to give us a surprise moment. And this, by the way, is a thing that like movies do all the time, where you have characters goes, all right, here's what I'm thinking. And then everyone leans in and the character starts whispering and then the scene just cuts. I think it's a little more believable in a movie where you can just cut away, where in this, like, he literally stops talking and then it just says Ben spoke briefly. It's just like, I think the way to fix it, and again, I'm not an author. This is a very specific personal Scott pet peeve that half our listeners are like, Scott, I don't give a shit about this. But I think the way to fix it would have been just don't have the scene where they discuss the plan. Like, just have them meet up and have their, okay, what do we do now thing.
Yeah.
And then you just cut away from it. And then you can even have the moments in the story where like we see Ben and Naomi and Dennis like carrying stuff and we're kind of confused as to like what they're carrying. And like, cause we see they're like transporting stuff back and forth to Under the Needle and they're like in a rush for time. And maybe like you can still have that and just maybe be a little bit more confused. And then you still get the shock factor of, oh my God, they land, like it's the napkins. Oh my God, brilliant. That's hilarious and thematically perfect, without just the clunkiness of just having a character just like the narrator just says, and I'm not going to tell you the second half of that line of dialogue because it makes for a more dramatic story moment.
Right. Yeah, no, so I guess the remedy is actually pretty simple. Just end that scene like 3 paragraphs earlier. And
yeah. Like, I don't know. Like, I get it. Like, I totally get it. And this is something that King does quite often, actually. Like, I'm reading I feel like every week I talk about a new King book I'm reading because I'm like frantically trying to finish my whole book King reread. But I just read Mr. Mercedes, and he does it several times in this book where he has characters outline their plans, and then it's like, and then he took the big thing that he bought out of the store and it barely fit in his car, this large object that I don't want to tell you about because it'll ruin the moment when I reveal it later. It's just like he does it a lot, and I understand because like he wants those, that's the thing about Stephen King is he wants to be in control of very specific control of when you know what. And sometimes he's like very, very free with that, where he just gives you the ending before you even get there. And sometimes he's very, very controlled of it, but he still wants the scene to exist. He just doesn't want you to see everything in the scene. And it's just, I can't help but just think it's a little clunky at times.
Yeah, I think I like that sort of technique best when you, the reader, didn't even notice the thing, even though it happened right under your nose. Yeah. Like, you know, he went into the store and he bought $27 worth of stuff, and you like don't even think about that fact until later, and then he pulls out the thing and it's like, oh, this is what 20 of that you know what I mean, like be more indirect and don't draw attention to it. I generally like it better when it works that way.
Yeah, one thing it also does is like when it got to the point of that book where it was revealed what the big thing that barely fit in his car was, there was a moment where I had to be like, wait, is this what the big thing was, or is it something else? And I think this here too is like, okay, so was the napkins thing the plan? Like, actually, when I was working on the script for this, I had to be like, okay, so this was the napkins thing, right? I think it adds a little bit more confusion into there where I don't think there needs to be.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, that's enough of complaining about the Scott pet peeve that I'm sure we'll hit again before we're done with this season.
I'm sure.
Very minor thing in a book that I otherwise really enjoyed. But I just want to say, like, I do really love this bit where they both realize that poor Dennis hasn't eaten anything in like a whole week. So now he's like starving himself as penance too.
Yeah, I mean, yet again, Dennis really seems to have taken on more than his share of guilt here.
Yeah,
I'm all about taking personal responsibility for your mistakes, but I guess at this point, I'm just kind of sad that, you know, even at the end of the story, Dennis has made everything right. You know, he has fixed his mistake but he still doesn't seem able to set that burden down.
Yeah,
and it's just sad.
Again, it's a mistake that is even arguably a mistake, right? Like, obviously, it was a mistake in the full context of everything we know. But, like, in the moment, I don't think anyone would have actually faulted Dennis for his decisions there.
Yeah, right.
So we see that storm has come and sent tons and tons of snow down into Delane Castle. But as you said, King is very specific to let us know that unfortunately the location of the needle in the center of the courtyard means that the snow blows right through the courtyard and piles up in all the corners. So everywhere but right under the needle, there is a bunch of soft, comfortable snow. And then we get to this part, which I really love. I really love this. And I must tell you now that Peter's rope was bound to break. When he tested it, it had held his weight. But there was one fact about the mystic thing called breaking strain that Peter didn't know. Yosef hadn't known either. The ox drivers knew it, though, and if Peter had asked them, they would have told him an old axiom, one known to sailors, loggers, seamstresses, and anyone else who works with thread or rope. The longer the cord, the sooner the break. Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. Yeah. I keep feeling a desire to reach for a metaphor with the whole breaking strain thing.
Sure.
So I don't know if I'm going to succeed here, but I'm going to take a leap of faith. So the reason why it's true that the longer the rope, the quicker the break, is that if you have a material with a constant variance of quality along its length, then the more of it you have, the more pieces of it will be at a lower quality. And you're more likely to have segments that are of particularly bad quality. Forming weak spots and therefore leading it to break faster. So in other words, when you have a lot of something, you're more likely to have both really bad and actually really good instances of that thing. And somehow my brain wants to connect this to like Flag and Peter being like two extraordinary people, but in very different ways in opposite directions. Or maybe even rope Thomas into this somehow as
interesting.
And like I don't have the whatever the keystone of this metaphor is supposed to be. I just don't have it. But I feel like something is I feel like there's something, deeper and beyond the idea of just like, oh yeah, ropes break sometimes.
What if we just say that like Delane is the rope and like maybe more broadly, any system is the rope, and the longer and longer the system exists, the more potential weak points it has along it that can be broken. Like the thing is, we've been told that Flag has been trying to take down the kingdom of Delane for hundreds of years and has never quite been successful. He's led it into dark times before, but never quite successfully brought the whole thing down. And the longer the kingdom has existed, the more weaknesses and the more exploitable things in it until it eventually breaks, which is exactly what is happening. And then Flag loses anyways, because the thing you didn't count on was the people there underneath you to catch you and to catch the kingdom of Delane and help it. The common folks, the common napkins that no one sees the value in, are there to catch you and keep everything going.
Yeah. I like the idea of the system, the society, as the thing which even you could even view the chain of monarchs as a literal chain, and say that Flag was waiting for the weak link, and he thought that was going to be Thomas, but it turned out Thomas wasn't actually as weak as he thought he was. And
that's true.
And that Peter, and he didn't deal with Peter. So yeah. Speaking of Thomas,
here King cuts back briefly to him. Poor miserable Thomas, who hates being king and is unable to sleep and finds himself returning in a sleepwalk once again to the eyes of the dragon. And I think the most important thing here, well, there's two actually. One I didn't write down, but there's this moment where like Thomas is wondering, is being king worth all this? And I love how the narrator says, yes, that's a good question to ask yourself, reader. Is being king worth all this? I just love that little moment of narration. Just kind of a wink towards your child audience of, is power worth the cost it takes?
Just all these little moments of wisdom conveyed to your child.
Yeah. But the other one here is, I think, King, for probably the fourth or fifth time in this book, ringing this particular bell about Thomas, where he says, he was sometimes a cruel boy, often a sad boy, this pretend king, and he had almost always been a weak boy. But even now, I must tell you that I do not believe he was ever really a bad boy. If you hate him because of the things he did and the things he allowed to be done, I will understand. But if you do not pity him a little as well, I will be surprised. So why is he banging this drum so insistently, Matt?
I feel like it's close to the heart of what he wants to do with the story is the idea that the world is not simply made of cartoon villains and stalwart heroes. I mean, we have the cartoon villain in Flag, we have the stalwart hero in Peter, but much of this story actually hinges on, the mistakes that Thomas makes, and then, crucially at the last minute, him being strong enough to do the right thing. Even though it's kind of too little too late, but it's also not. Like when we get to that scene, maybe we can analyze it in more detail, but it's crucial to the story that he does make mistakes, but that he feels bad about it and tries to make up for it. Like that's what most people are like. We're all much more like Thomas than we are like Peter. And I think when you're telling a story to your kids, it's good to have the Peters in the story to make, a sort of aspirational figure of like what you could be like. But I think it's also valuable to have the Thomases in the story where it's like, hey, sometimes you're going to be like Thomas and, don't hate yourself for it. I actually think that's valuable.
No, I think you're really onto something there. I think it is no accident that the final confrontation of this book is not Peter versus Flag. Like they don't yes, Flag chases Peter through the castle, and yes, Peter is instrumental to his own escape. But I think it is very telling that Peter does not escape the needle by himself. If he had been by himself, he would have died. Peter does not defeat Flag. Thomas defeats Flag. It is very much like in the Tolkienian sense, you have Aragorn, and then you also have Frodo and Sam, who are the ones that are actually like at the end, like doing the thing, right? And I know Thomas is not really Frodo and Sam in this particular metaphor, but I think it is important that you have the traditional, fantasy hero that is Peter, but he would be nothing without the people around him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Thomas actually kind of reminds me of a bit of a Gollum, where it's like clearly a flawed and tragic character, but much hinges on him nonetheless. And he's not as tragic as Gollum because he actually does the right thing in the end. So
yeah. He does have a path back, and he theoretically takes it.
Theoretically,
we never really get to see, but yeah.
But there's a lot, it's stuff like this where I actually, imagine having interesting conversations about this book with my kids in, maybe just a couple more years when they're old enough to read it.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about was the way that this book doesn't necessarily like the way the book ends, and maybe I should save this till we get there, but the way the book ends is like it's not that it's a sudden end, but it's like everything that we've been talking about, these ideas of duty and loyalty and, Thomas and Peter and good and bad and godliness and dog, like it's the ending just kind of ends, and it never feels as if we've like definitively concluded on a lot of these themes. And I think maybe the point of that is these are just things that like you, the reader, are supposed to take back with you and just ponder. And to your point, like if you're reading this book with your children, like to just discuss, like how do you feel about duty? How do you feel about what Thomas did? How do you feel about what Dennis did? How do you feel about why is Peter the way he is? Like all these questions that these events that don't necessarily have pat answers within the story itself, but bring up ponderances that you can bring to your kids.
Yeah, because it's not as simple. The story is not as simple as saying loyalty, good. It's much more. But it doesn't ever, like in my estimation, ever definitively say the point of the story is loyalty and not necessarily good. It just kind of introduces this idea, but it doesn't like ever like it. We've talked about how King is not very subtle with his metaphors at times. I think this book does not like bang a drum at the end of it that says, here's what I was trying to say. I don't think he does that. Yeah. No, you're right. That's not his approach.
Yeah. So anyway, as the storm gets worse, a squat tower in another part of the castle collapses, and this tower, Matt, is ominously titled "The Church of the Great Gods," and its collapse, as if signaling an end to our characters' protections from these quote-unquote great gods, serves to wake up the sleeping Flag, wake up the monster in the castle.
Yeah, that's interesting. I assume the great gods are the beam guardians, and King hadn't named the beam guardians yet.
Sure.
But in any case, like the collapse of the temple of the beam guardians would feel like the moment of, the power of good has strained to the breaking point, and now evil is coming around.
Yeah. I love how King describes Flag's like nagging feeling that something's wrong. He describes it as a ferret running around in his head, gnawing at his brain. I love this. That small, bad-tempered animal ran around in his head, worrying him, insisting that he had forgotten things, that other things were going on behind his back. It raced, it gnawed, it ruined his sleep. I just love this image of this like you could kind of see how it slowly kind of drives Flag insane.
Yeah. Yeah, and he gets worse and worse as the story progresses.
Yeah. So the ferret forces Flag to look through his magic crystal for help, which is where the dream that we see that both Peter, Ben, and Naomi all had, a Flag looking into some shining object and seeing Peter and being shocked. This was where it came from. It is described in no way that would make us think that this is one of Merlin's rainbow, but come on.
It totally is, yeah. if King had explicitly thought up Merlin's rainbow in 1987, then it would have been one of Merlin's rainbow. Or it is Merlin's rainbow. We'll just say that it is.
This is I think the fun and sometimes frustrating part about reading these, exterior to the Tower books, that it's like so much of what the Dark Tower is and what the Dark Tower became was done, when King was specifically writing those books. And so does this book take place in the same world as the Dark Tower? Yes. Does that mean everything's going to line up 100%? No. Are we going to have to squint at some of these things and get creative and make our own assumptions? Yeah, we're definitely going to have to. And I think it's fine. I think it's absolutely fine for us to say, yeah, here we go. This is another one of the orbs. That's it. Let's just say it is.
Yeah, it is.
It's like he's not Tolkien. Like when Tolkien decided that the ring that Frodo or that Bilbo had in the Hobbit was going to be the One Ring, he had to come up with a reason for why that also made him invisible, and so he just wrote some lore about it. King is not going to do that. He's just not. And so this is the rainbow. It is declared.
On the other hand, there's just like a particular rock that Frodo happens to stand on that allows him to see what's happening in Gondor, which has nothing to do with the Palantir or anything.
Yeah, touche.
But I don't care. I think the idea of a seeing orb is pretty specific.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even described as an orb here, though. Like, it's a crystal. I think it's described as soapstone, so it's like just a rough, unpolished.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't look anything like any of Merlin's rainbow, is what I'm trying. Like, if someone came to the story and said, "No, Scott, you're 100% wrong. This has nothing to do with Merlin's rainbow in any way, shape, or form," like, I couldn't argue with them.
No, see, here's my catch-all way of dodging out of that trap is that this is a told story. This is a narrated story, which might have been corrupted over the years, and so there might be little embellishments. The storyteller doesn't necessarily know what Flag's seeing stone looked like.
Yeah, this is. I mean, that's a catch-all for literally anything you can.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment.
That's good though. But it's the rainbow. Come on. Which color do you think it is though?
I'm just going to go ahead and say it's the grapefruit. Well,
that doesn't make any sense. You took it one too far from me.
But it's the green one, because doesn't it say there's a green light? I thought it said there was a green light.
I think there is a green light. I don't remember. I don't remember if it described it as green or not, but green seems evil, so yeah, it's probably a green light.
I thought it was the green light, so yeah.
I do love how this crystal, in a very Merlin's rainbow kind of way, attempts to tell Flag the thing he needs to know via other methods. First, we see the god-dog conversation that has ruled so much of this book, but most importantly for the plot, instilled the desire for napkins in Peter. Then we see Peter playing with the dollhouse. It's like giving him clues as to what's happening here, and he just is like, stop, I don't need this.
Yeah, he's too impatient and dumb to think through the implications, which he's gonna undermine himself again.
Yep. So finally, Flag sees what he wants, Peter climbing out of the tower by a nearly invisible rope. So he grabs his executioner's axe and runs after him, cackling like mad. So, I mean, this is interesting, right? We've never seen Flag act like this, really, in the other stories we've seen him in, right? Like, even at the end of his life, right before he was devoured by a were-spider, he was always kind of the calm, collected, mysterious, but controlled person. This seems closer to the crazed Crimson King we meet at the end of book 7 than it does the Randall Flagg we've seen.
Yeah, he definitely, we've never seen any form of him, of this character across all the stories as an axe-wielding maniac. Although I guess I thought maybe the character that we knew as Walter O'Dim might conceivably behave this way just because he seemed kind of unhinged.
I guess the guy, spitting on and leaping over a corpse, jackhammering over a corpse over and over again, possibly.
Yeah. But I mean, this is great. I mean, it is interesting to sort of consider like the way King sees his evil characters, like this guy, that they're always eventually going to run out of patience and snap. And to go this way, basically.
Yeah, this is so true. And I think that like the more you read of King, the more you're going to see that this is kind of just generally true, not even within Midworld or the Dark Tower mythos, but like King's evil characters across his entire writing history. Like our heroes almost never face the great evil of the story at its full strength because evil rots itself over the course of the book. Normally we follow the evil over the course of the book, and it is kind of self-destructing and rotting. We see this, we've specifically seen this with Flag now. We saw it with Mordred. We saw it with the Crimson King. We saw it arguably with Barlow. Maybe even with Ed Deep now is not at his best the moment when our characters finally confront him. We see this again and again and again. And I think this is, as we said, another kind of King's Tolkienian evil is self-defeating vibe that he goes for, right? This idea that like evil is rot, and rot is by its definition transitory. It doesn't, rotting things don't stay forever. They break down, they decompose, they get, they deconstructed over time. Like there are thousands of things Flag could have probably done in this situation to defeat Peter and his friends. Like he's like the conniving genius who set this whole thing up, right? Like he manipulated hundreds of people. He guessed correctly over and over again. He came up with this brilliant plan, and here he is, just his solution is to just run around with a giant axe screaming. And that's his great plan at the end here. It's just like, it's so fascinating watching this idea of this evil just eats away at itself over time.
Yeah, right. And I think to connect this to one of my hobby horses, how King treats, fear and insecurity in his powerful evil characters. I think a lot of this is motivated by Flag thinking that he's about to lose. It's like, oh, I'm so close to winning, and now he could get away, and this actually kind of makes him panic, because I think almost all of King's, at least all of King's monsters that I've encountered so far have been basically frightened in some way. And I think I think the clearest analogy here is Pimley Prentice and Algo Cientu, right? Like this idea that like they're so close to the end, they're so close to winning, and they know something's coming, but they don't know what it is, and they just kind of lose it, and they stop thinking clearly. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, fascinating. It really is. Like I love this idea that like, we've talked about evil with King so many times, but like this idea that evil exists, there's no way to stop it from existing, from rearing its ugly head, but like it is as I said, transitory. Like it will not last forever. Like it's going to come. Like it's a really interesting look of things that like the world of Stephen King is not like everything is darkness and then occasionally a light shines. The world of Stephen King is much, there's a lot of light everywhere, there's darkness too, but the darkness always goes away. Like it's always going to go away eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you described, it always defeats itself. It always gets greedy or it panics or,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. Regardless of his plan, I love King paints us this wonderfully intense scene here when he's climbing out, when Peter's climbing out the window, Flag is on the ground, like sprinting up the stairs. Like King emphasizes this by bringing numbers into it. You know, we've talked about the effectiveness of numbers and counting to build tension. We kind of we have this the number of steps he's sprinting up the tower. We know it has 300 steps and he's going, so it's like giving us this ticking clock. You kind of are so into it that you forget that King has just explicitly told us that Peter's rope is absolutely 100% going to fail, and you're just kind of swept into the get out the window, Peter, go, oh my god, get out, go. It's just remarkably effective.
Yeah, it's a great sort of out of the frying pan and into the fire thing, because you're like, well, he kind of has to take that leap of faith there, because Flag's just gonna kill him. The audiobook was also particularly great here, where the voice acting for Flag is just absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, I bet. I do love that in contrast to the crazed Flag here, though, we see a Peter that manages to keep his cool. And I think that distinction is pretty important. I like the fact that he is afraid of Flag. I love this line here. Thomas would have been astounded to know that Peter had always been frightened of Flag. Peter had just hit it better. Like, I love this. Like he's been as afraid of Flag as his younger brother is, but Peter is going to hold his head and not succumb to panic in the same way Flag is.
Yeah, it's our kingly Peter.
Yep. And I do love the detail that Flag is just like chopping randos heads off. Like people don't answer the door quick enough. And so he just chops that guy's head in half.
Yep.
It's wild.
He's lost his discipline. He's so close to achieving his goal, and now he just can't hold it together.
Yeah, I mean, because let's say he wins and defeats Peter. How many? I guess because his position to Thomas, it would be okay for him to just run around crazed and killed a bunch of guards and stuff. But surely that's not going to do good for his ability to maintain his position of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I guess I figured that things had devolved to the point where it almost wouldn't matter what he did at this point.
Sure.
But you could entirely be right. This could be a very damaging move for him to make. What's going to happen the next day is Thomas going to be okay with that? Honestly, I feel like it's probably at this point, Pena has already run away. Thomas is completely in his pocket. So it's what else is going to, what could the consequence even be for him? But that's just because I think he is on the verge of winning. That's what makes this so dramatic, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting. I want to talk to you about that, because one of the things that Flag is super frustrated about is that he wasn't able to go out and crush the rebellion against Thomas. And part of me is well, why would you want to do that? Wouldn't you want a full armed civil war to come to isn't this your goal, Flag? Maybe he just doesn't want it to happen yet. I don't know. That part confused me a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't think of that, but I now I see your point, and I don't know.
Anyway, we then cut over to Thomas, who wakes up he wakes up with his head in the dragon niner. So he wakes up as the dragon, and looking at the sitting room, he decides he needs to go down and visit it. Which, by the way, isn't it interesting that this didn't become Thomas's sitting room? Presumably this is the sitting room of the king. And then, so did Thomas just chill in his apartments? I mean, the reason is obviously the massive amounts of guilt that he feels he could not live in his father's room. But I thought that was an interesting detail. The book never specifically spells it out, but Roland's apartments remained Roland's apartments, just empty.
Yeah, right. I think he definitely just feels like he can't fill his father's shoes.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I really love this part. Suddenly, Thomas became aware of a strange, almost eerie desire in himself. He wanted to go into that room. He wanted to light the fire. He wanted to put on his father's robe. He wanted to drink a glass of his father's mead. He would drink it even if it had gone bad and bitter. He thought he might be able to sleep in there. A wan, tired smile dawned on the boy's face, and he decided to do it. He wasn't even afraid of his father's ghost. He almost hoped it would come. If it did, he could tell his father something. He could tell his father he was sorry.
That's great.
It's really great. And I love this idea that, like, this general idea that, like, this room has been left empty the entire time. Almost arguably, the role of King of Delane has been left empty the entire time. I think that's a great way of symbolizing that Thomas has never moved into the king's apartments. And now here at the end of the book, he's going to do it. He's going to, put on his father's robe, step into his father's shoes, drink his father's mead, become his father, become Roland the Good, become king, and do what will end up being his only really kingly act the entire time of his reign.
Yeah. Well, crucially, he's facing up to his own guilt because he's like, well, he's been afraid of and running from his father's ghost, both literal and metaphorical. And now he's like, I can't run anymore. I'm too tired. I'm too miserable.
Yeah. So back with Peter, we see him finally step out of the window and put his full weight on the rope. I love the cheekiness of this line that is, for better or worse, his life now depended on the napkins. And that's both true in multiple senses, because there's also a big pile of them waiting in case he falls under him. And there's a small structural note I wanted to talk about here that might have gotten lost to you as an audiobook reader. I really love how here in this moment, our chapters start to get ridiculously short. At one point, we have chapters 123, 124, 125, and 126 all on the same 2 pages. So when you have the book open in front of you, all of that is on 1 page. It's a fun device that kind of turns that tension key up a bit. I like the pace of the story moves faster and faster and faster. And because there's actually like less relative content on each page of the book, because so much of that space is taken up by the giant number and heading of the new chapter, you're turning the pages faster. You're moving through the pages faster at that pace because of that. And it makes it feel like the actual like rate of the book is speeding up, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I love that device wherever it's used in fiction. I was a bit confused, honestly, because we were counting stairs and then we were also changing chapters, and so the audiobook reader would just be saying numbers, and I was like, was that a chapter or was that a stair count? Honestly, it didn't bother me. Like I kind of suspected that that's what was happening, but it was like, I don't really care how many stairs there are left, so whatever.
Yeah, definitely the function it had on a book written down definitely is different from the function it would have in audiobook, for sure.
Yeah.
So Flag gets up to Peter's cell before the boy has finished his climb down, but instead of cutting his rope, Flag sees that the rope is fraying and will definitely break, and he just decides to wait and watch it happen. another mistake from the usually smart Flag. He of course doesn't know about Dennis and Ben and Naomi and the pile of napkins they've just finished unloading under the climbing king. And I love this line here. He preferred to let matters take their course, and a moment after he had challenged the voices, matters did take their course.
It's delightful.
Yeah. So Flag's mistake, Peter gets a few more feet down. Like, that's interesting, right? Because Peter does look up at Flag at some point and completely freeze and stop climbing, but he still makes some movement before Flag, like, greedily and confidently yells down at him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he did get closer to the bottom. Maybe just the key feat that allowed him to survive this fall.
Yeah, Flag's, like you said, is greed to watch Peter die horribly, of his own accord. I guess, this does strike me as a very, the Man in Black thing is like this belief that the world actually works the way he wants it to work, or the way he thinks it will work, and that he's right and the good guys are wrong. And, you'll see, the rope's going to snap and he's going to die because that's how the world works, because, people like you always get fucked and people like me always win. And it's like, well, sometimes that is true, actually, but not always.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting that perhaps we could say that good old Randall Flagg's greatest flaw is a complete misunderstanding of how evil in King's universe functions. That your success is always transitory, and you're definitely gonna, like, you don't understand that at the end of the day, you're but a passing shadow, you know?
Yep.
I do really, really like King's choice to make the rope fail here. I do think there's a version of the story where Peter just is able to climb down the whole way. I think it's important that for all of his brilliance and dedication in this plan, in both coming up with the plan and carrying it out, he still needed the help from others. He needed the help from the people to get the supplies even in his cell, but also he needed help from them because if he didn't, that he would have died on the fall. So this is like, the book is basically saying this was never something he was ever going to be able to do all on his own. He needed these people, Keeley, a farmer and a servant, you know, the common folk of the kingdom, in essence, to be able to succeed. He needed these people.
Yeah, I mean, and if they had tried to, you know, break in and save him, that wouldn't have worked either. It had to be this plan that involved all of them and their own, you know, knowledge and skills.
Yeah. Peter, of course, survives the fall, which you were saying he probably wouldn't have.
I mean, we don't really know how far the fall was, but just based on how it was described, I was like, oof. Yeah.
It's not, like, a pile of napkins can't be that soft. Like,
it's better be a big pile of really soft napkins. Maybe they're magically soft. I don't really
probably,
care.
Yeah. And as they rush off, the enraged Flag makes his journey down the tower after them. I do really love this part where the group of soldiers move to stop them, and Peter, you know, becomes king again. "Halt in the name of the king, you say," Peter said. He stepped calmly towards the terrified Gossick until the two of them were almost chest to chest. Less than 6 inches separated them. The guard fell back a step in spite of his own drawn sword and the fact that Peter's hands were empty. "And yet, I tell you, I am the king." It's another really wonderful moment of Peter the king.
Yeah. And everybody just... you know, again, very, very Aragorn. Everybody just recognizes his kingliness, and they're like, yeah, okay.
I also love the guard's response here is that, "Mayhap he murdered, mayhap he didn't. All I know is that it's a royal muck, and I'll not step into it lest I drown in the quicksand of kings and princes." You know, another beat here that emphasizes this idea that, like, the trials and tribulations of the royalty are just so far removed from the average person's, you know, concerns, that this guy just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, right. We've seen beats of this throughout where people are just, they're mainly just like, whenever they're in the presence of the leadership, they're just terrified, basically, as a background fact.
Yeah. So Peter and his friends move on, and we see that they're all heading towards the place where this all started, Roland's apartments, where we now already know that Thomas is waiting. And so we can kind of maybe start to see the plot kind of draw itself together in really fun ways. I do like this. Now, Peter thought, as blood pounded in his temples and his heart raced hotly in his chest, "I must slay another dragon, a much greater one, with the same arrow." So there we go. Flag is the dragon, right?
Yeah.
Flag. So I want us to spend some time thinking about the name of this book, maybe next week. But I think we have to keep this transfer of the image in mind when we do that.
Yeah. You know, and honestly, I had forgotten on my first read through that Peter has this plan, that he's like, the plan is I'm going to kill Flag with the arrow, but it's actually Thomas. So
yeah. So speaking of Thomas, we move back to him, who is at the moment taking his father's bow down off of its perch up by Niner. And we see this. For a moment, he stared directly into one of the dragon's green amber eyes. He had seen much through those eyes, but now, looking into them, he saw nothing but his own pallid face, like the face of a prisoner looking out of a cell.
Maybe it's because I just finished Drawing of the Three, but I think King really likes the imagery and the concept of people as prisoners to their own flaws.
Yeah.
Or their own mistakes.
Definitely. And the juxtaposition of, you know, Peter is the one that's been locked up in a cell for 5 years, but Thomas has been just as much of a prisoner this whole time.
Yeah. I like that.
So they get into the room just in time, and I really love this bit, Matt. We have to talk about this for a bit. Frisky understood the true nature of things better, I'll warrant. Something was coming, something with a black scent like the poison fumes that sometimes killed coal miners in the Eastern Barony when their tunnels went too deep. Frisky would fight the owner of that scent if she had to, fight it and even die. But if she could have spoken, Frisky would have told them that the black scent approaching them from behind did not belong to a man. It was a monster chasing them. Some horrible it.
It's great.
This book was written before it came out, by the way.
That's funny. I was kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I think he was working on it at the same time, but it wasn't out yet.
It's one of these things. Maybe we'll talk about this more next week. But like, it's one of these things that does come into my mind, and then I realize I don't really care. But this portrayal of Flag as basically a demon in human skin.
Yeah,
I kind of enjoy the way that it doesn't quite square with the image of Randall Flagg, Walter O'Dim, the Man in Black, that we get when he finally has to pluck out his own eyeballs and feed them to a spider baby. It doesn't fit, but like it doesn't fit in a way that I find delightful for some reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think I know what you mean there. It's definitely like, I mean, there's a lot here, right? Like we see this Flag gets his eye shot out.
Right.
That's not something we ever see from Walter or Martin or even Flag later in the Dark Tower. He's got his eyeball. So like there's a lot of weird inconsistencies here with who this person is. And I mean, that's just part of what makes Flag this mysterious, weird kind of villain. Like that, like I almost think knowing too much about him is bad at times.
Well, I think the way I kind of can square it is I can say that he was a person who was born human and he made himself inhuman. But he's still got some of that. He's got enough of that humanity left that he can still be killed ultimately.
Sure.
I do think it's very interesting that here he gets his eye shot, and then the way he actually dies involves his eyes as well. I just think that's interesting.
That is true. That is true.
Especially in a story called The Eye of the Dragon.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we got to talk about that, right?
Because I'm jumping ahead, but yes.
Okay. So Peter's friends move once again to defend him, but he stays their hand. This is like the second moment where Peter's friends have reached for their swords to pull out their swords and fight on his behalf. And both times he's told them to stop. Like the first time he said, no, I can handle the guards. And he talks down the guards instead of fighting them. Here, it's basically like, this is my fight, not yours. He summons up all his kingliness now and commands Flag to leave Delane forever. And I love the writing here, Matt. I love it so much. Peter thundered this last in a voice which was greater than his own. He thundered in a voice that was many voices, all the kings and queens there had ever been in Delane, stretching back to the time when the castles had been little more than a collection of mud huts, and people had drawn together in terror around their fires during the darks of winter, as the wolves howled and the trolls gobbled and screamed in the great forests of yestertime. It's just like, it's like, holy shit, it's him going full fantasy.
Yeah. And very Tolkien shit here. Yeah.
It is very Tolkien, and it's just wonderful.
It's Peter unfurling the banner and revealing the shards of Narsil reforged into Enduril. Yeah, it's great. I love it.
Yeah. So even with that commanding kingly moment, Flag still advances, but then Peter shows him Valera's locket and reminds him of the same thing he had done. I love this because he says, yes, you forgot, Peter repeated. I think that sooner or later, things like you always begin to repeat themselves because things like you know only a very few simple tricks. After a while, someone always sees through them. I think that's all that saves us ever. It's a really great moment.
Yeah. It's funny because we laughed at how uncreative Flag is last week, and here Peter points it out himself directly.
Yeah, definitely. I do think, to talk back about this idea that evil defeats itself, that last line here, after a while, someone always sees through them. I think that's all that saves us ever. It's actually like, I think King's view on evil is incredibly optimistic at times, but it's also a little bit terrifying, right? This idea that if evil ever got its shit together, we'd be fucked. That like the only way we win is because evil invariably fucks itself. And that's comforting because it means evil will always lose in the end. But also it's like, okay, but what if they found out? Like this, that's all that saves us ever, you know, like we are completely powerless to stop this, but fortunately it manages to stop itself.
And I mean, evil can do a lot of damage before you stop it too. Like there's nothing in here that says evil always just loses immediately. It's like, no. That's not what Stephen King thinks. That's obviously not what happens. Evil can do quite a huge amount of damage. It's just that its nature is to destroy itself ultimately in the end, which may take, you know, the early part of the 1940s, for example, to kind of play itself out.
Yeah, true. I also love how we pointed this out. Like basically Peter says to Flag, I know what you did. And Flag's like, who cares? No one will believe you. Nobody saw. And then we get this moment. And then from behind Peter, a new voice spoke. It was not strong, that voice. It was so low it could scarcely be heard, and it trembled, but it struck all of them, Flag included, dumb with wonder. There was one other who saw, Peter's brother Thomas said from the shadowed depths of his father's chair. I saw you, magician. It's just like a great moment. Like, I love that everyone like sprinted into this room that Thomas was just sitting in, and typically nobody noticed that Thomas was there until he speaks.
Yeah. But this time that was for the good because that he's able to make this dramatic reveal.
Yeah, and he speaks, and like I love the detail that like his voice will never sound like Peter's, right? He's never going to thunder with the voice of a lineage of kings and queens throughout all time, right? But that doesn't necessarily always matter because it was not strong. It was so low it could scarcely be heard, but it struck Flag dumb with wonder. You know, like sometimes the most powerful thing can come from, you know, a not powerful voice.
Yeah, just one voice finally speaking truth.
Yep. So Thomas draws back his bow, and this is when I remind you, Matt, that it was established early in the story that the one thing Thomas was better at than his brother was archery. This is the one thing, Matt. He was good at archery.
Mm-hmm.
And so he fires here, and his aim is perfect, hitting Valera's locket right in the center and carrying the locket right into Flag's left eye, the eye of the dragon. It pierces it, and black fluid pours out, and then Flag disappears and is gone. And now I ask you, what the hell do you make of all that?
I mean, it's super badass for one thing. And I feel like giving it a sense of resolution and kind of relatively clear victory for our heroes is a good way to end, you know, a Stephen King story for a younger audience, you know, quote unquote.
Sure.
Although, you know, even this story says Flag isn't really gone. So I don't know. I think I have a lot of thoughts on how Flag fits into the cosmos. Maybe those would be best saved for next week, just because that's one of those conversations that involves like all of the books and can become quite intricate.
Sure. Yeah, we can save that for next week.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the moment is really, I love the detail of it. Also spearing the locket and just taking that to like giving Valera his last moment of justice, even if it like, I love this because you kind of go into this knowing that Flag must be defeated for this to be a book, but like he can't die. We know this, right? We went into this knowing this, and yet to have something so satisfying as this, as seeing his defeat, seeing like this locket, like justice is kind of served in a way, even though Flag is not killed outright.
Yeah. The locket for some reason reminds me of the box that he stole from Peter, specifically because I guess it just reminded me of this idea that he repeats himself, and it's like, you know, he has this instinct for mischief, but like maybe the instinct for mischief is just like 400 years ago, he saw a box, he stole the box, he put some poison in it to frame somebody. And then when that same situation arose again, he didn't even consciously realize that's why he was doing it. It just seemed like a familiar situation, and he stole the box by instinct. And it's like, it's because he repeats himself over and over, and he only has, like Peter says, this handful of simple tricks that's how his instinct for mischief manifests.
Yeah, I love that. We didn't talk about that when we talked about that line, but the idea that it's not that he's like, oh yes, I have this great idea and I know it's a great idea and I know it works because I've done it before. He just legitimately forgot that he did it. Which is just, again, kind of shows the general incompetence of evil, that like, not only does he only have a bag of a few tricks, but he can't even remember the tricks he's employed before.
That's great.
Yeah. So Thomas begs Peter for forgiveness and puts himself to his judgment. And of course, good King Peter spares his brother. I love this so much. Peter, I'm sorry, he said and began to cry. I am sorrier than you will ever know. You kill me now, I guess, and I deserve to be killed. Yes, I know I do, but before you do, I'll tell you something. I've paid. Yes, I have. Paid and paid and paid. Now kill me, if such is your pleasure. Thomas raised his throat and closed his eyes. Peter walked towards him. The others held their breaths, their eyes wide and round. Gently, then, Peter pulled his brother from his father's chair and embraced him. Peter held his brother until the storm of his weeping had passed, and told him that he loved him and would always love him. Then both wept, there below the dragon's head with their father's bow at their feet, and at some point the others stole from the room and left the two brothers alone. Isn't it great that like weeping is what got everyone into this whole mess, and now here at the end, like it's this completely unjudgmental, beautiful crying session with two brothers reunited.
Yeah,
everything's okay.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I didn't make that connection, but I think that's totally intentional now that you pointed out.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe I don't know, maybe I'm reaching here, but it seems like some of this could have been averted if those two brothers had had their weeping session over their father's death when it happened, rather than, you know, now. I don't know.
Yeah. I do love the detail about, like, you know, he pulled his brother from his father's chair, and that, you know, putting his father's chair in there, not just saying he pulled his brother up from the chair, from his father's chair, you know, puts their father back into the mind of the reader. And I think it allows you to take this embrace, and this loving embrace, as like, we never actually got to just collectively mourn the death of our dad.
Yeah.
Who we had complicated feelings about, sure, but we loved because he was our father. And they never got to do that. And I think it's really important they get that moment together.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's one of the strange things about reading these books the way we do is, you know, this is a fairly short book. But for me, it's been like 3 or 4 weeks since Roland was out of the story. So it's he's a very central part of the story, though. You know, it's funny. At the beginning of this book, I was like, oh, I'm never going to get used to saying Roland. I'm going to always think about Roland Deschain every time I say Roland. And like pretty quickly, I like, no, this is the Roland that I'm thinking about. Obviously, you know, I have no trouble keeping them separate because this Roland was such a distinct character, actually.
Yeah, I think that is the mark of good characterization, that there's no confusion there at all. That is one thing I've noticed, like, talking about this book, like, there's a lot of characters with very standard, typical names, you know, Peter, Dennis, Ben, Thomas, you know, like these are not distinct names. These are very common names.
Biblical names.
Yeah. And I've never had the trouble remembering who was who. Like, I think in some other books we've talked about in a book club, it's like I'll say the wrong name when I mean the wrong person, because like but I think the characterization here is so strong that I just know the name when I'm reaching for the, you know, this emotional spot of my mind that is this character. Like I just know Thomas, I know Ben, I know Dennis. Like they're just very, very distinct in my mind, and I think it's just because they're very well fleshed out characters.
Yep, that's writing, that's storytelling mastery.
I think the one book you'll see me make that mistake so much in is Salem's Lot, because I think that the big problem that book has is it's almost the opposite of this book, and that a lot of those characters are just not very distinct. And I do think, especially with, you know, a character that is named the same, with Ben Mears is the same name as a character from this. I think I said other names when I meant Ben, like over and over again, because he's just not a great character.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember the English professor's name is Matt, but I'm actually blanking on the doctor's name, which is sad.
Oh my God. I was about to make fun of you for that, and now, oh my God.
No, you don't have it either.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
but I'm pretty sure it's one of these common, Christian names. Like Tommy or something like that.
This is really going to drive me insane. I might cut the long pause as we try to figure this out of this, but like I legitimately need. Oh, see, it's Jimmy Cody. But,
yeah.
Okay. The problem was I was like, it starts with a C. It starts with a C, and then I was like, that doesn't feel right, and it's because that C was his last name.
It's funny you say that because I was thinking, is it Chris? Would like for some reason I had C on my mind too.
Huh, interesting.
Brains are weird.
Yep. All right. So Thomas here, we're told, decides that he cannot stay in Delane. Too many people will remember him and hate him here, which, fair. Plus, he's got a quest of redemption to do. So he says he's going to go after Flag. And we're told here that our good pal Dennis goes with him, also under some need for redemption, despite everything that he's done here.
Poor Dennis. Just be kinder to yourself. I feel, I don't know. I like the ending of the book, but part of me wishes that Peter were like, no, you're going to stay here.
Yeah, you've done it. You've done enough. Sir.
Yeah, right.
Ben, maybe you can go. Just take Frisky with you. You'll be good.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like Flag is this incredibly dangerous monster. You're just going to send these two kids off after him?
Yeah, it's not a good plan.
Yeah.
And we never actually find out what happens because the book ends here with all I can tell you is that Ben and Naomi were eventually married, that Peter ruled long and well, and that Thomas and Dennis had many and strange adventures, and that they did see Flag again and confronted him. But now the hour is late, and all of that is another tale for another day. And that's the end of The Eyes of the Dragon. But this is the point, Matt, where I remind you, of course you already know, but I remind you that in the drawing of the three, we do have this brief mention of both Dennis and Thomas from Roland. Here he is saying, one of these men had been a creature the gunslinger believed to be a demon himself, a creature that pretended to be a man and called itself Flag. He had seen him only briefly, and that had been near the end, as chaos and the final crash approached his land. Hot on his heels had come two young men who looked desperate and yet grim, men named Dennis and Thomas. These three had crossed only a tiny part of what had been a confused and confusing time in the gunslinger's life, but he would never forget seeing Flag change a man who had irritated him into a howling dog. He remembered that well enough. Then there had been the man in black. So that's what we get from the gunslinger himself, that he remembers seeing Dennis and Thomas. Desperate and yet grim. Desperate and yet grim.
What a foreboding description. And we don't really see, do they succeed? I mean, we kind of know they don't succeed. I guess the real question is, like, do they die horribly?
Yeah, honestly, one of the first times I read this after having read The Eyes of the Dragon, I misread the paragraph and assumed that one of them was the one that Flag turned into a dog. And I because I saw the delicious thematic resonance of the fact that, like, Thomas is turned into a literal dog after his mother's lesson to Peter about the difference between gods and dogs. But that is not what the paragraph, that is not actually what the paragraph says.
But we do have the mention of a dog in close proximity to the mention of our characters from the story, which is just delicious.
I will say, I do think, like, the reason I made the mistake is because I think there's some clunkiness in this paragraph in general. He would never forget seeing Flag change a man who had irritated him into a howling dog. I think the first time I read that, I read the hymn as it was a man who irritated Roland into a howling dog, because like we changed the subject here, right? Like, he would never forget seeing Flag change a man who had irritated him into a howling dog. So when you're reading it quickly, the he and him, I think your brain just kind of says, oh, that's the same.
Yeah,
but it's not. It changes.
That's the second clause of the sentence. I mean, yeah, like, you're not wrong. I think that there's a lot of this kind of writing and drawing of the three where it's always, forget what word, somebody used the perfect word, but it's like this fever dream, a lot of it. Like a lot of it literally a fever dream, because he's literally, going mad with fever. I think it's pretty clear that it's Flag who changed a man who was irritating Flag into a howling dog.
No, I mean, and it only makes sense in that way. But I'm just like, if you read it quickly on my first read, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But there lies the end of this quest. It turns them desperate and grim, and we don't know if they ever actually catch up to Flag. I mean, I guess we do. I mean, there's no way they survive that encounter, right? Like, if we know that Flag survives the encounter,
I mean, it's possible they just lose him and they, go back to Delane. I guess I kind of want to. I want to know though. This is I'm adding this to my list of things that I will ask Stephen King someday. Is like, hey, are you ever going to finish the story of Dennis and Thomas? And I'm not going to add any other details. That's exactly how I'm going to ask it. And based on his reaction, we'll know.
I'm just going to pretend that the person that was turned into a dog was Thomas. And that's the heroic end of Tom. It's, honestly, that's such a fucking Stephen King thing to do, because he has this thing where he's like he's done this. I can't spoil this for you, but he has like a whole book about like two characters, their marriage is on the rocks and they go through this terrible ordeal, and like, they make it through and everything's okay now, and then like you meet up with them in the next book that's not even about them, and a character's like, so how's your marriage going? Oh, she left me. Just you son of a bitch, Steven. He does this so much where like he'll give you a good ending, but that if you catch up with the character again, I think this to me is a very subtle, might not be the right word, but like I think as much as Stephen King loves connected universes, if anyone ever asks him what a character does after the end of the story, he's like, fuck you, he dies. Like his like that it's the story. The story's over. It doesn't matter what he does after the story. And I mean, like, I think it's like after the end of the story, more bad stuff's going to happen, because that's how the world works. Like, we kind of saw this with Dr. Sleep, right? This idea that like, oh yeah, he survives this terrible ordeal Danny does. And then what happens? Well, he becomes an alcoholic just like his dad, because that's how the world works.
Yeah. Well, at least it's not as depressing as the movie was.
Yeah. True.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like this story being kind of lighter, I'm like, but surely these characters didn't have a horrible fate because they're from this story, I don't know. Obviously this is all pretend and he just made it up in his head and nothing actually happened to them because they're characters, but I still want closure. Damn it.
You don't. Like, that's the thing. You don't want closure.
A part of me,
because you will not like the closure you get.
I think that's the complicated thing about this, is a part of me does, because a part of me actually thinks these are real people, because that's why stories work on us. Is a part of us always thinks these are our friends Dennis and Thomas, and we want to know if they were okay. And the bigger part of us knows that that's not true. But I don't think, no matter how old I get, I never quite believe that the characters I'm reading about are not real.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. Like, that's 100% true. And as much as I don't want to admit it, as much as I complain about people I see losing their shit over characters, I'm like, you guys know those aren't real. In the moment, they certainly feel that way.
Yeah. That's the result of good storytelling. You succeeded in tricking me too well.
Yeah. Your brain gets tricked and its empathy machine is activated, and then you hurt it. You hurt your brain.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that is the end of The Eyes of the Dragon, but not the end of our coverage on it, because we will be back next week to talk about the book as a whole, and for Matt to go down his complicated Flag hypothesis. And
Flag analysis.
Yeah. But first, Matt, before we finish this episode, we have to talk about last week's discussion question and discuss all of your great answers to it. Matt, what was the question from last week?
The question was, how do you define duty? And what is an example in storytelling where someone does their duty?
Now, I know we made this joke last week, but we're all about to say the word duty about 50,000 times over the next 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to need you all to get your laughs out now, and then we're just going to move on and stop making jokes about poop. Okay?
I don't know if I believe in us enough for that, but sure, we'll do our best.
All right.
So first, we have from Just Stand 8460. Duty is a compulsion to behave or act based on dedication to a, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, code of conduct. This could be associated with one's family, community, country, job, faith, or anything else. The trouble is that these so often contradict one another that we must weigh the cost of loyalty to one form of duty against another at the expense of our own integrity or emotional well-being. Additionally, there are often external consequences to betraying one's duty to something. As I wrote out my definition above, I was reminded of the film Hacksaw Ridge. In this story, a man has been called to go to war during a draft. Duty to country tells him he must enlist and follow the commands of his officers, which will inevitably mean taking the life of an enemy soldier. This man also happens to be a Jehovah's Witness, and duty to faith prevents him from doing anything that causes the loss of life of another human being. Thus, he is labeled a conscientious objector and treated as a pariah among his comrades. That is, until he saves all their lives at the Battle of Hacksaw Ridge, because his sense of duty to faith, as well as duty to his role as an army medic, also compels him to preserve life, even at the risk of his own.
That's a good example. And I think that illustrates the ways in which we see, like, even in this book, the contradictory expectations of duty and loyalty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, this is the problem with trying to live by the virtues, of which, duty and loyalty are virtues, but virtues always come into conflict with each other. I mean, you could say like the majority of Greek and other old world tragedies involve the conflict of different virtues against each other, and it makes for fantastic drama because
it sure does.
I got kind of choked up reading that answer, actually. It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah. Felidao says, as a broad definition, I think of duty as an internally derived sense of obligation towards something greater than oneself. The sense of internal motivation can take many forms, including guilt, love, honor, revenge, and so on. And what one feels as a duty towards can be similarly diverse. A dream for the future, a moral code, the will of a king, the salvation of the universe, etc. There are many examples in fiction, but I'll pick one closer to home. Roland's duty was to save the Dark Tower, but it was not his duty to enter it. To save the tower was a mission that far transcends Roland's own self and ego, but the desire to enter and climb to the top was a purely selfish obsession.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
I've been saying it. No, I love that answer. Yeah, that's great. I love that distinction, and I love using duty in that sense. Perfect.
Yeah.
All 84001 says, Duty, as in Call of, is an online first-person shooter video game that I had to give up playing due to being shamed by a series of 12-year-olds with much faster reflexes and a penchant for letting me know just how big of a whore my mother allegedly is. Okay, I'll answer seriously now. I always came back to the gunslinger's moral obligation to the people of river crossing in the wastelands. It's actually Eddie who explains to Jake the slippery slope of sticking around to help those old folks out, and how one thing would eventually lead to another, and before they'd know it, ages would pass with still more things left that they could do for them poor old folks of river crossing. Roland joins the debate and reinforces Eddie's point that while it would be a noble pursuit to help them, meanwhile their Katet's true duty, fixing the broken heart of the Dark Tower, would remain undone. Without sober perspective and a sense of the greater good, one's duty can get out of control. You can't right every wrong on the way to your tower, otherwise you'd never make it there. Wait, isn't the point of Roland's failed loop that he didn't slow down, stop, and pick up the Horn of Eld? Thus, stop and save all of God's little children along the way.
Yeah, I mean, this is I love this because this is the complicated nature of this shit, right? Like it is very easy to say, well, what is your duty is for the greater good, right? Like the maximize good is your duty. But like, how do you realistically calculate that? You can't. You're just a human being. And so how do you actually, like, I think so often we can use duty as kind of like a shield to justify our behaviors. I think that is absolutely what Roland is doing in this instance. Yes. And it's just it's so complex and confusing.
I agree that most instances of people justifying their actions for the greater good are used to justify doing the locally bad.
Yeah. Explaining away why I didn't want to do this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love, like, we talked a lot about, Jake's, come to himself during the course of the Dark Tower. And we kind of gestured towards not a corruption of Jake, but like a gunslingerification of Jake, that we were like, is this good? and I think one of those things is, like, Jake is like, it's very difficult for him to understand. He's like, no, but they need help. Like, why is it bad for us to help these old people?
Yeah.
Like, please explain to me, adults, why is it bad for us to leave these old people in the lurch? It's like, because they need a lot of help. That's why.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, what?
Yeah. Shut up, dumb kid. What do you know?
Yeah, what do you know about duty, you stupid kid?
Hey, remember when you let me fall and then that was a mistake? Remember that? Can I connect this? Can I connect the dots for you any more clearly, Roland?
Yeah. Oh, God, I love the Dark Tower. So good.
Yeah.
All right, next up we have Shortstop88, who says, I'm unsure if I have an actual answer, so in the absence of one, I'd like to say Dennis fulfilled his duty to his king by crawling through the king's duty.
It's good.
It's pretty good. That might get a laugh. If not, I just finished the 7.5 Deaths of Everlyn Hardcastle yesterday, so my half-baked answer would be that we see Aidan Bishop decide it is his duty to rescue 2 women who owe him nothing from horrible fates because he felt that it was the right thing to do as a human. Whether that's loyalty or duty, I'm not sure. I can't really define the difference, so that's a half-baked answer. While typing this, I actually thought of a time where this might apply in One Piece. Fuck. I won't go too far into this since it bugs you guys. Purely for the only 2 fans of the story that listen to this podcast, I will say that I am thinking of when the Admiral gives a child an escape route where the rest of his military are killing all the people in his home island. Loyalty for the military would sanction he had to kill her as well, but rather than simply letting her escape, his duty as a human pushed him to direct her to safety. You got me again, Shortstop. I'm always the One Piece answers.
I think One Piece has everything in it,
Yeah, apparently. Well, yeah. I mean, when you have infinity episodes, it's very easy to encapsulate every idea.
That's true. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle was a book club book that we did. Yeah, and I do like that idea. I like the idea that I never thought of duty as being something that was kind of in play in that story, but I think duty is a flexible enough concept that we can absolutely apply it here.
Yeah, and I kind of like Shortstop was like, "What's the difference between loyalty and duty?" Good question. What is the difference between?
I mean, it seems to me that duty would just be loyalty. Loyalty is duty to a specific person. Yeah. In a specific way, whereas duty can be, as others have pointed out, to a concept, to a country. So. All right. Pear Jane says duty. It's a compulsion to perform some service, and I would add that in fantasy stories, it's usually a duty based on an inheritance of some kind. Inheritance is tricky. You can choose to deny it, but you will likely always feel the pull of it. This bears out for Peter, Thomas, and Dennis. All 3 of them inherited the duty to serve. During the entire run of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, yes, Matt, again, she struggles with this duty she inherited. She has enormous powers, but from that first episode, she already understands the cost of doing her duty. She's already lost her friends, her parents' marriage, her familiar home, and she's decided that despite her inherited duty, the cost is no longer worth it. Of course, by the end of season 1, she comes to understand the greater cost of not fulfilling her duty, and she spends the rest of the series trying to balance her compulsion to serve against her desire for a normal life.
Wow, that sounds like a great show.
It sounds so dramatic and deep. It's a shame it's so many fucking episodes. Another such example is Frodo. See, Matt, I didn't let you down. Frodo inherits the ring from Bilbo, but unlike Buffy, he doesn't understand the cost of it and even volunteers for duty at first. One of my favorite moments in the films is Gandalf's sad, resigned smile when Frodo steps forward in Rivendell to claim his part in the Fellowship. Gandalf already knows what the ring will cost Frodo, but he also knows that no one can carry the ring but Frodo. After all, it's his. Frodo's journey to Mordor is about understanding the cost of his mission and then acceptance of that cost. His acceptance is so complete that even when he survives his task, he still chooses to move on. Like Buffy, Frodo would not have fulfilled his duty without the support and bravery of his friends. Their friends' duty is not inherited, but they're still compelled to help because the stakes are so high and their trust in the hero's mission is complete. In both cases, the ultimate cost of duty is death, and still they fight. My favorite stories make the core conflict about balancing desire against duty without glorifying the duty in some abstract way. It's a concept I've come to love more as I age, especially after having children. Parenthood is a daily struggle between duty and desire.
Oh, that's good. That's good and true. Good and true.
Yeah, right. I mean, I talk a lot about parenthood on here. Obviously, I think that's one of the positive aspects of duty is that it can, as I've said before, transmute something that is difficult into something that produces meaning. Such that it is no longer, just a bummer. Like I feel like when I was a kid, it was hard. I don't know. I never understood the idea that duty was a thing that you could be happy to do. It always seemed like a burden.
Yeah.
But I think it's like if it really is your duty and you've internalized it as your duty, then it can be very, very fulfilling to do your duty.
I like this because you're absolutely right. And it's a powerful tool for good and evil, right? Like there's plenty of bad actors out there that will abuse people's sense of duty to get them to do something that you want them to do. It's a very powerful draw.
Yeah.
And I love stories that really examine all sides of that.
Yeah, I like that.
Belwaz Deserve Better says duty is generally some kind of moral or legal obligation which compels the behavior of an individual or group. The fascinating thing to me about duty is the choices it forces one to make when obligations come into conflict with each other. As such, my favorite example in literature comes from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire saga. The prime example of this is Jaime Lannister's eponymous choice to slay the king he swore to protect. Jaime becomes a knight, believing in this imagined ideal of knighthood he grew up hearing stories of, but is quickly disabused of this fantasy by the harsh reality of conflicting oaths. He is sworn to protect the royal family, but must stand silent as the king rapes the queen. Jaime becomes jaded and dissociates to avoid the contradictions until it becomes too much for him, and he must decide between obeying the king's command to kill his own father and protecting the weak and innocent as the king is planning to burn the entire city and everyone in it rather than surrender. Jaime sums up this concept of impossible standards of duty in the quote, "So many vows they make you swear and swear. Defend the king, obey the king, keep his secrets, do his bidding, your life for his. But obey your father, love your sister, protect the innocent, defend the weak, respect the gods, obey the laws. It's too much. No matter what you do, you are forsaking one for the other." Ultimately, duty is interpreting responsibility, making decisions, and taking actions. There will always be a contradiction. Duty is in the deciding.
I like that a lot. And of course, that is probably the single best monologue in the whole Game of Thrones TV show. I think Jaime Lannister is just a fantastic character for examining this exact question.
Yeah, you're totally right. That didn't occur to me when we asked the question, but I think it's great. It's absolutely wonderful.
I like that last note that there will always be contradiction. Duty is in the deciding.
Yeah.
It's never going to be clear cut. That's part of life. I don't know. That seems simple and profound.
Yep.
All right, baby, can you dig your Sam says, duty at its core is some kind of moral or ethical obligation. This obligation can be to a person or organization, and it can also be to a system or an idea or concept. Often we say that people are doing their duty when they are doing something that they don't necessarily want to do or requires some kind of sacrifice, but they are morally or ethically compelled to complete this obligation. Scott has cut something out because of Stephen King spoilers, so I'm just going to read from this point on. I think of Elizabeth and Philip Jennings' loyalty to their homeland, Russia, even why they are raising their children in 1980s America in The Americans. The ending of that show was one of the best endings ever. Duty for country over all else. But what were they left with? So poignant, so real, and so perfect. They then go on to say, I was really tempted to go with Jack Shepherd's duty in regards to the island and Lost, but did not want to hear Matt groaning again. Seriously, this series deserves a rewatch.
It really does, Sam.
Well, baby, can you dig your Sam? Opinions vary.
Do they though? Do they? There's opinions, and then there's people being wrong. Which one are you, Matt?
Agree to disagree.
Next up, we have Unshaved Testicle, who says, I'm sorry, I can't read that name without laughing. When I think of Duty, I think of Doc Brown and Back to the Future Part 2. Marty had just lost the sports almanac to Biff after he was called chicken. When he got to Doc on the school's roof, he apologized and said it was his fault, and Doc only replied, "No time for that now. Which way did he go?" I think of that whenever things are getting stressful at the office or a blame game is going around. No time for that now. Let's get things done. So I like that. That's a different interpretation, but I like that. It's just like duty is just, it's the thing you got to do. So just, you just do it.
Yeah. Being practical and solution oriented rather than, flailing about trying to blame someone. It does seem to me that the idea of blame is like antithetical to the idea of duty in some philosophical way.
Sure.
Complicated 9519 says duty can be summed up in multiple ways, I suppose, but I'd say duty is kind of parallel to loyalty. You are also, for the most part, loyal to your duty. Duty is something that you know must be done. Other than that, I don't know how to explain it. Going off with loyalty and duty being parallel but different, there's an anime that's fairly new called Ranking of a King. This show revolves around a young boy of 10 to 14 who is the son of two giants, but because his father made a pact with the devil, all the strength this boy Boji would have had went to his father. This child is puny for a giant, so weak he can't pick up rocks bigger than his fists, and on top of all this, he is deaf and mute. This child is the first prince. He also has a younger brother, much like Peter in Eyes of the Dragon. In this show, the royal court has loyalty pledged to his father. Bosse, I don't know. I guess
that's the name of the father.
That's the name. But Bosse. But when he dies and in his will demands Boji be made king, they overrule it, putting his younger brother Data on the throne. This is where loyalty and duty differ. They have a sense of duty to Boji, but not much loyalty. They make sure he doesn't get hurt and he's safe. They train him in swordsmanship due to his father's wishes, even though he will never be able to use one. They also have the sense of duty to their kingdom and feel like if Boji was placed on the throne, that their kingdom would be in peril. Boji also decided once his brother became king that it was his duty to go on a journey and become stronger, so when he returned, he could be the type of king his kingdom would want. Okay.
I love you, Complicated, but as a young boy of 10 to 14 who was son of two giants, but because his father made a pact with the devil, all the strength that it would have went to his father.
That's anime.
That's so anime.
We need like a jingle that's just like, that's anime.
Yeah, just something I can hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, on my soundboard over here.
Mm-hmm.
It's like That's So Raven, but anime.
That's so anime, yeah.
The Walking Hard case says, interesting thing about duty is that it's totally subjective. Some of the best stories, including this one, center around the characters being torn between different senses of duty. My favorite example of duty is the duty of a son to avenge the death of his father. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many hours of sword fighting practice, even learning to duel one's offhand. You guessed it. Inigo Montoya's duty to avenge his father's death. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
It's a good one.
It is a good one, but interestingly enough, and I don't know, the movie doesn't examine this. I sadly haven't read the book. Like, it's obvious that like this duty was destroying Inigo. Like, he was a drunk and like a mess, an absolute mess.
Yeah.
And he gets what he wants at the end, but like, it's like it's not good. It's not good what he was doing to himself.
Right. It's an obsession. And I mean, he makes himself the best swordsman in the land, but I don't think that's what his father would have wanted for him specifically. So
yeah.
So I mean, there's a dark side to duty, obviously. Gerardo says, I think a good analysis of duty comes from Star Trek and characters who are driven by logic, especially Data, but also Spock, Tuvok, etc. There are many episodes that put these characters' duty to the test, as they have at times competing duties to Starfleet, the captain, the ship, etc. Especially for Data, who is a programmed android. How does he resolve these competing loyalties when he sees the captain or crew going out of boundaries or breaking rules to complete a mission? This also ties in well to the theme of God versus dog, being a god of our destinies and being actively involved in and responsible for making decisions and taking action, versus being the proverbial sheep, trying to absolve yourself of responsibility and duty by simply obeying orders, taking a path of least resistance, procrastinating, etc.
Oh, I like that a lot, because that squares Thomas's, decision at the end to take responsibility, stand up, as him, falling squarely under that God part of the paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And of course, I love any answer that involves Star Trek.
Of course. Walking Dude 22 says, in fiction, there are many examples of people fulfilling their duty. Sometimes this is John McClane fulfilling his duty to serve and protect the citizens of Nakatomi Tower when they come under terrorist threat. Other time, it is Chris Knight, Val Kilmer, taking young Mitch under his wing to fulfill his moral imperative of vengeance upon the incredibly douchey Kent in the movie Real Genius. The main thing is the duty is not something you just have. Duty is a responsibility to something you are charged with. This charge can come from your family, your job, your community, your employer, or your government. In fiction, this is a sense of duty frequently drives the plot. It also illustrates complexity in characters as they balance and prioritize their obligations. For example, Roland Deschain has a duty to protect the tower. This duty doesn't exist because he is a human being. It arises from his birthright as a gunslinger of Eld. Interesting. This idea that your sense of duty comes from stuff entirely external to you.
Yeah, I think I might add a wrinkle on that and say you can definitely decide that some duty applies to you, but I take your point that even if that's the case, it's usually the world that sort of offered up that duty in some way.
Yeah, because I mean, like the John McClane example is interesting because as a police officer, he kind of does have a duty to protect and serve, right? But I mean, technically, he's a New York cop in Los Angeles. Like there's nothing in his job description that says, hey, you've got to take all this on, buddy. So it is definitely partially externalized in that by being a cop, he feels the sense of duty, but it also internalized because he takes that above and beyond what a normal person would do.
Yeah. I like that. And it's not like anybody ever tells you that you have a duty as a, father. Like nobody ever had that conversation with me. It just is obvious. I don't know how else to put it.
No, nobody gave you the duty talk, man?
Yeah, nobody gave me the duty talk. Never got the duty talk.
It was while they were teaching how to change diapers.
Oh, I missed that meeting.
Yeah.
All right. Damien to me 1111. It brought to mind a quote from the Dune novels. When law and duty are one, united by religion, you never become fully conscious, fully aware of yourself. You are always a little less than an individual. There is a real, and then that was the quote. They go on to say, there is a real danger in giving over one's power to a system, but that's what we tend to do throughout history because we ultimately want someone else to take care of us. And the system gives us the illusion of being safe within its rules and order. The people of Delane celebrate Thomas taking the throne because things can return to normal. Pena and Peter believe first and foremost in the system, the law. But even the law does not always align with the white. What Stephen King and Frank Herbert allude to is the inherent danger in people needing leaders in order for there to be order. It leaves people vulnerable to tyranny, and then individuals' sense of duty gets skewed. That's when we get government overreach and people committing atrocities in the name of insert ideal or belief here. These authors are aware that these institutions can weaken people's self-reliance. Yeah, this is true. I was just thinking about the fact that we put all of our faith in the system, and then we sort of see the system as the world, and if a meteor is heading our way, or in the time of Delane, if a big flood is coming and the king isn't aware of it, it's like, what was the failure here exactly? Was it a failure of the king? Was it a failure of the society for trusting a king who didn't have the resources to know that information? You introduce a lot of brittleness. There's a lot of advantages to having centralized leadership, obviously, but there's a lot of brittleness as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Lots to think about here.
Yeah,
I'm pondering as we're reading.
Yeah, me too.
Next, we have Richard G, who says, for this week's discussion question, I'm choosing Dune. I'm new to the series. I've been meaning to get into it for years, and with the movie coming out, a friend gave me the trilogy, and I finally started reading it. Just a touch late to the party. Duty seems to be a major theme in the story, especially in House Atreides. And from my point, Paul, I think it can be a bit of a trope in stories like this, that a character like Paul would battle with his position and the weight that comes with it. You're just kind of waiting for the character to get out of their woe is me funk and and have some sort of awakening. There's very little of that with Paul. He's strong and understands his duty to his house and family. The same could be said for Peter. In another story, Peter could have crawled into a corner and waited for someone on the outside to break him out or prove his innocence. Instead, he takes his life in his own hands. I love that for a young character. He understands he has a duty as true king to the people of his kingdom.
Yeah, there's a lot I could say about Paul specifically. I guess
Don't
I'll just
spoil it for Richard.
No, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say, like, it was definitely a specific and interesting choice to make him so strong from the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, just as a fantasy protagonist, as a sci-fi fantasy protagonist, he's one of the rare ones where he begins the story already in a place of such strength. Especially compared to most, young prince characters.
Yeah, definitely.
It does remind me of Peter a lot, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Eric T says, duty is the conscience manifesting an ideology and or a way to avoid cognitive dissonance or feeling guilty in the future. That's interesting. They go on to say, you feel compelled to act because you believe in some ideal or structure and so want to act to better it or protect it, even if you don't like, say, the bank you work at. If it's your job to protect the bank, you may still feel an obligation or sense of duty to your position as bank guard. Your duty then is more to how seriously you have taking a job, how seriously you take having a job, or how seriously you take your job, specifically without regard to the system, the bank, for example, itself. I like the way they frame this as a way of avoiding feeling guilty in the future, because that's often a way that we make our decisions implicitly. We don't actually think to ourselves like, oh, if I do this, I'll feel bad about it later. That's just kind of a floating assumption almost, but I think it's worth articulating it.
Yeah, I do like that Eric kind of says that duty is all internal, like mm-hmm. is a conscious mind, like manifesting something internally, whereas one of other answers said it was externally motivated. And I'm not saying like one of them is right and the other is wrong. It's just interesting how we all kind of view this thing in slightly different shades.
Yeah, and it's funny as I can see the validity of both of those perspectives, even though they're apparently contradictory.
Yeah. Steve L says duty is defined as a moral or legal obligation, a responsibility. It's what you should do, have to do, and or supposed to do, even when no one else would know either way, and whether it would be good for you or not. Interesting. So Steve's introduced a new concept that I don't know if we've talked about specifically. This idea that duty is something that you would do regardless of if anyone would ever know whether you did it or not. Mm-hmm. Like this thing that is you are so compelled to do something that it is not even about what the social response to you doing or not doing the thing would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that also rings true for me. I think the fact is that this is an overloaded word that we put a ton of different meanings on. So it kind of does mean all these things in different contexts at different times.
I find interesting what we haven't spent a lot of time talking about is a lot of people's definitions include the phrase a moral or legal obligation. Like legal duty is not something these answers have talked about, but that is part of it for sure, right? Like we talked about how how our systems enforce a sense of duty, but like there's also just legal. You are required to do X because the law says so.
Yeah. For some reason, that's reminding me of the fact that like 10 million times when I was in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, I had to like swear to my duty to God and country and all this stuff.
To do your duty to God and country. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I swore to repeatedly that I was always like, it's kind of disingenuous to make me swear all these things that I don't really understand completely. Like what is my duty to my country as an 8-year-old exactly? I don't know. That's an aside, but that I was reminded by the idea of the law being an aspect of duty. Because like, is it really duty if you have to do it? Like if somebody's gonna put you in jail if you don't do it, you know?
That's a good point.
Like that doesn't feel like duty to me.
That's a good point.
Well, anyway, yeah.
You gonna do Boy Scouts with your kid?
I haven't so far. And
I don't think I'm gonna do it.
It's not because I decided not to. It's just life's busy. But
sure,
I got a lot out of it. But
I mean, I didn't get nothing out of it, but I feel like there are other ways to get similar things. I don't know. I don't think we're gonna do scouts.
Yeah, I definitely went camping a lot more than I otherwise would have. I'll say that much.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah. Jennifer D says, why does duty always seem to end with the most loyal and innocent secondary characters dying in the service of the protagonist? Of course, Jake and Oy come to mind first. There's a slew of other King characters that I won't mention for spoiler reasons, but you know who I mean. Also, Dobby and Hedwig. Why? Fuck duty, you guys. Go home and have a sandwich. Yeah. Well, that's certainly one thing that fiction loves to use the tragic side of duty to have innocent beloved characters sacrifice themselves in that way. Yeah,
that's definitely true. All right, last but not least, we have Matthew H, who says, I've never answered a discussion question, and I couldn't think of a really good explanation of duty in a story, but I wanted to share my real-life experience with the word. We talk about duty in an abstract sense. It is something inherent or something that is learned, is up for debate. Part of my job as a forester involves wildland fire, and every person on an incident that goes out has a pocket document called an Incident Response Pocket Guide. It includes all the most vital information we need, and in the opening pages, it defines duty, respect, and integrity. I have never seen duty defined and explained in a practical sense, and that's what I wanted to share with you. It's just so different from what duty is in my mind. So here's a screenshot from the Pocket Guide, just something to chew on. So he's provided this screenshot, so I'll just read a little bit of this. Here's the way this firefighter pocket guide defines duty. I'm not going to read all the bullet points, but just some of them. Be proficient in your job, both technically and as a leader. Make sound and timely decisions. Ensure tasks are understood, supervised, and accomplished. Develop your subordinates for the future. So it's interesting they put all that under the tag of duty.
Yeah, it's almost like these are things that they think that a good leader, a good team player is obligated to do, and these are your duties.
Well, I was just thinking about that. Like the concept of duty and the idea of duties feel different to me. Like it shouldn't, but like if the top of this page said duties and not duty, I would feel different about them, because like duties to me feel like, oh, these are just, here's the stuff you got to do. But like and the concept of duty is so much more than just like here's a list of stuff you have to do, to me.
Yeah. I mean, yet again, I think it's one of those words like people will say like, yeah, I'm on laundry duty, and it's like, you don't mean that you have a profound moral obligation to laundry. But no, it's just really fascinating. I think organizations often don't quite know how to handle these abstract. I'm not like criticizing this, by the way. I'm not saying like the firefighters don't know what the fuck they're talking about. That's not what I'm doing. No, it's just like you often see this with organizations where, organizationally speaking, you don't really know what to do with a profound philosophical concept like duty. So you make it work as well as you can. No, I think that makes sense for sure. All right, so that is it for this week's question. Tons of answers. Thank you, everyone. I think, Matt, we're going to have to seriously look into limiting our answers, because we're going on far too long on the. There's so many of you out there giving so many great answers, and we want to read them all. But this section's getting really long. Yeah, we'll just have to ask worse questions.
Yeah, there we go. I think we're probably going to put a limit on it in the future. And just like put a max, and then just kind of try to rotate through y'all. We want to make sure you're all getting read and discussed on the podcast, but the section is getting pretty long, so we'll figure something out. Yeah,
we do appreciate all your answers. This is a very thought provoking week. It was like 40 minutes of reading though, so
yeah, it's a lot for us. And I don't know how good. Like, y'all tell us. Is is this section of the show interesting? Like, I enjoy doing it. Matt enjoys doing it, but I don't know how many people like enjoy listening to the discussion question section. Besides the people that are hoping to hear their answer read. I don't know. So let us know. Maybe we'll put a cap on them. We'll figure some stuff out. I'm always willing to change the structure of the show to make it as good as possible. So.
Yeah, I agree. Let us know.
All right. Speaking of questions, next week we are turning things around on you folks, and we are going to make you ask us the questions because it is another one of our overview episodes. And on those overview episodes, we do a mailbag where we answer any and all questions you have for us. So send them in. This is going to be the last time you get to ask us questions for a while, Matt. The next mailbag will be the end of April. So this is it. If you have some stuff you want us to talk about that we haven't talked about, either about this book, about season 2, about the Dark Tower as a whole, or you know what, just anything, send in those questions.
Yeah. This will be a more free ranging discussion as usual.
Yeah, for sure. All right, that is going to do it for us here this week. Next week, as we said, we will be taking one final look at The Eyes of the Dragon before we move on to the short story and then eventually to Stephen King's The Talisman.
Yeah, and remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter @kingslingerspod. I just wanted to mention, since we haven't mentioned on this show recently, or maybe ever, that Scott and I also have Twitter accounts. Scott is Scott Daily 85 on Twitter, and mine is Moridinamail, which is spelled MORIDINAMAEL. I'm sorry, I need to change it. It's too long.
I actually spelled it wrong in the script.
It's pretty.
Damn it!
It's pretty good. That's pretty funny, Scott. You're teaching me a lesson. Honestly, it's impossible to spell. But anyway, if you just want to, hear our silly thoughts,
our inane ramblings on whatever. That's what Twitter is.
Or like jokes that don't actually make sense. And then of course the subreddit at r/doofmedia is the way to get in contact with all the other listeners of Kingslingers and answer the discussion question and ask us your mailbag questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it. Head on over to all of those different apps. And you know what? Just to be sure, to leave no stone unturned, subscribe to them all. Just do it. You just got to be thorough.
Yeah, you should get at least 8 notifications on the morning that this podcast comes out.
You could miss one,
Yeah.
Earlier today, my wife very, very subtly said, "Hey, a while ago I turned off my notifications on my phone, and it really helped me stop checking my phone so much." And I was like, "What are you? what are you trying to say?"
Uh-huh.
So what I'm saying is do the opposite of that and have more notifications.
Yeah. It should just be sitting there buzzing freely just all day.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, if you like our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patron RJ Kleeman. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the cool stuff over there on the Patreon.
Yeah, don't forget to check out all those other Levels of the Tower episodes, RJ, including the one that's coming next month, which is going to be on the Shining miniseries, which, by the way, Matt, not available for streaming anywhere. I've ordered a DVD copy, and I'll be sending that your way.
Oh, my God. All right. Okay, great. So glad.
And of course, folks, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. This show will remain free for the near future. You can help. I'm not gonna hem myself in. You can always help out by sharing this podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends, or just randomly on all those great social medias. Also, you can help us out by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's spotlight review comes from Magpie4307, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Long and long, but worth it." Like a King book, I need to pick and choose what I listen to and how much time and attention I want to give it. So I can only speak for the Dark Tower Books pod. Low Men in Yellow Coats, wish they'd have done The Complete Hearts in Atlantis, and an episode here and there. It's well done. Very well done. Thought-provoking, interesting, well thought, lots of fun. When I listen, I hope for more of the two hour plus shows and not a 60-minute show. They have fun with it, and they talk and wander around the books and chapters like me and my friends discussing books or movies or games. I listen when I like and know the books. Sorry, I can't say that for all King's works. That's okay. And I wish I could pass along for the rest, but when I hate a book or the subject, no matter how interesting these guys are, I pass. However, when I do turn in, I am hooked through the bag, to quote Eddie Dean. Give it a listen. I think it'll be worth your time. Enjoy. And to host Scott and Matt, thank you, Sai, for the content. Well, thank you, Magpie. I don't know if you like this book, so I don't know if you're going to be listening to this particular episode.
Yeah. And you know, it's such a great compliment. I've never been told that I had somebody hooked through the bag before. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully many more to come. And an important update on the Spotify mystery, Matt. Turns out Spotify's ranking or review service is literally just a ranking. You just give stars. There's no place to enter a review at all.
Oh.
So that's why we can't see them, because they don't exist.
Very well then.
So thank you to everyone who listens on Spotify and has given us a rating. For those of you that haven't done that yet, please do that. It does help us out a bunch. Head on over to Spotify if that's where you listen and click those 5 stars or however many you think we deserve. It will help out, unless it's a 1, in which case maybe just don't do that.
Maybe just don't do that. Yeah.
Although I have to, honestly, if you are listening to this right now and you think we're a 1-star show, I want to have a conversation.
Yeah, I'm just confused.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. We will see you here next week for one final chat about Stephen King's The Eyes of the Dragon. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.